Hey folks, Andrew Mark Rowe here. Welcome to my podcast, Sophia. Sophia is Greek for wisdom. If you pay close enough attention, it's pretty clear that everybody's wise in our own ways. Although wisdom is pretty hard to transmit, given that it's the product of experience, it's nonetheless important, not to mention a lot of fun, to try. This podcast is focused on conversations with people about our stories of development, the lessons that we've learned, and the different ways we navigate this wild ride of life. Also featuring the odd solo philosophical deep dive. I hope that you enjoy. Hey folks, I'm here with Melissa Stangl today. For anyone who might not know who she is the CEO or COO and co-founder of Soltara Healing Center in Costa Rica. I don't want to get into too many details at this point because I want to hear it all from Melissa herself. So, Melissa, the way I start this off, I kind of ask probably the biggest question anyone will ever ask themselves in their life. But who are you?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, that's a question I'm discovering constantly every day. But right now, I am a COO and founder of Soltara. That's been my main project for the last couple of years, really. So Soltara is an ayahuasca healing center in Costa Rica. We work with indigenous Shipibo healers from the Peruvian Amazon. And this project is a few years in the making. I founded it with someone who used to work at a center in Peru that I also worked at, Dan Cleland. And we've built a really beautiful community of Shipibo healers from Peru. And I managed operations at the previous center in Peru. And so this center is kind of a bit of an evolution of that, I would say. Really feeling like these medicines, as they're spreading out into the world, a lot of that indigenous voice is easily lost. And so, we really felt as we were expanding outside of Peru, how do we keep that tradition alive and really honor the people who have carried this medicine for generations. And so we've really been so honored to continue to work with these Shipibo healers and also place a strong focus on integration. That was something that I struggled with after working with the medicine. I'm sure you can relate.
I think we all do.
Yeah. It definitely felt like a need in the community. A lot of retreat centers offering ayahuasca really didn't had some integration support and talked about it, but what I really felt and what other members of the team really felt was that integration was as important as the ceremony itself. And so really trying to be a bridge in that way, working with clinical psychologists and advisors to help people really set themselves up for success. So that's what I've been working on. I come from a very scientific background. I have a master's in engineering from University of Pennsylvania, and I did cancer research and studied biology for many years, but realizing that healing is a much more expanded definition than I originally thought.
Fair enough. So I want to talk to you about ayahuasca, but I want to kind of get a little bit more background about you. So where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born in Philadelphia and I grew up in Maryland, and pretty close to nature. And my dad was a very scientific scholar. He was an acoustic engineer for the Navy. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I was very lucky to be raised by her, but a very free spirit, and they both come from the hippie generation. And so they always instilled a sort of open-mindedness about that. However, they didn't let on that that smoking weed was like okay until I was well into my 20s. So a bit of a late bloomer there, which was good for my journey anyway. But yeah, I grew up there, and then I went to Philadelphia for college, and just had a very scholarly mindset, very conditioned to, achievement in that sense of the word. And I think I'm grateful for it because I definitely got a foundation of, understanding discipline and how to work hard and things like that. A lot of it was very much led by what I thought I was supposed to be doing, which, was a good experience, but definitely wasn't nearly as fulfilling as when plant medicine discovered me.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we all kind of have that path initially with where we kind of follow what people tell us to do rather than, kind of following our own heart, which I think was, in my experience, the medicine really helped with that, with kind of opening me up to kind of, my own inner voice. And, that's
making space for intuition was a big lesson for me. I think that deciding to explore this possibility or this realm was kind of the first time I felt as if I was not just doing something because I thought I should be doing it, that I felt that it was just the right thing to do. And I didn't really know it then, but it was I was feeling the call, as people say, or my intuition, I guess, was really speaking and calling me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny how it all kind of, in my experience anyways, it kind of, you think it's all this thing that's kind of like a disparate, like almost like an equation, like A plus B equals C with your life. Like you kind of like you do these things, but then you kind of like start to look back on it and you kind of see it as this one continuous process that kind of fill in all the gaps of why things happen the way they did. And,
that was definitely formulaic to a point where, my parents did instill in me. I mean, like I said, they went through their hippie phase, but for them, that was just it. It was just a phase. And it was like good while it lasted, but then it was time to get serious and, get a job and, have a family and settle down and all of these things. So I do feel like we're sort of taught that, especially kind of in this generation that's sort of a changeover from, our parents' generations before us. The age of the internet and the different ways to connect with technology are really opening up all these different possibilities for people and allowing, I think, different paths to be created, that isn't necessarily following the expectations of being a cog in the wheel and staying at the same company for 25 years and, retiring with your pension at that age. And so, opening up to new possibilities was sort of unheard of until it was kind of like, oh, I had no idea this was even a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I look at you, Melissa, and I see the path that you've taken. I just, a tremendous amount of courage. I mean, I'm going to ask you this: how did we meet?
Yeah, it was interesting. I guess maybe I'll go just a little before that, because it was actually Reddit that really started this whole journey for me. From the bowels of the internet, my life came forward. And I was on Reddit, the internet forum, and one of the subreddits or subforums that I was following was ayahuasca. I don't even know how I got onto that, but I just happened to be following it. And Dan, who, I had no idea who he was at the time, was advertising for a retreat through another center with ayahuasca. And it was kind of weirdly perfect timing right after I was graduating college, before I was about to start this job for corporate America that I knew I was going to hate, but I really needed the money. And so that was that first decision where I was like, I think I should do this. I don't know why, but I have a good feeling about this. And my partner at the time was like, oh, cool, you're going to go do drugs in the jungle with some dude you met on Reddit. Like, awesome. And I,
a little bit skeptical.
Just a bit. And I was like, no, I just, I have a good feeling about this. Like, I think I need to do this. If you're so nervous, then, come with me. Like, let's do this together. And so that ended up happening. And from there, I told Dan the trip went amazing and I had a really profound experience. And I told Dan, I have to go take this job, but let's keep in touch. And 2 years after that, we kept in touch, and he needed an operations manager for the center he had built at that time. And so I was 2 years into the job I definitely hated as much, if not more, than I thought I would. And I was like, that's what I'm doing. I'm managing operations, but I would love to do it for you. And so he was like, well, do you think that you can learn Spanish? And do you understand that this means moving to Iquitos, Peru for at least a year? And I was like, give me 2 months, and yes, I will definitely come and move to Iquitos, Peru. So that was an interesting turning point, because I really did need to get out of the life that I was living. And I just felt like this was, I had asked for a big change in my life, and this was definitely the answer to that. So I was like, well, when opportunities like this present themselves, when I first applied, I was like, I don't think I'm going to get it, but I have to at least apply. And then I got it, and I was like, well, I got it, so I have to take it. Like, that's really the only way to honor that opportunity coming. And so I sold my things. I sold my car, learned Spanish, ended my relationship, and moved to the jungle. And so I think it was the second week.
No parachute, just jump right in.
I mean, if you're gonna do it, right?
Yeah.
And so it was the second week, I think, or maybe third, that I was there, that you came through as a guest. And so for the first month, it was like the best job training program ever, because basically my instructions were to heal myself and drink lots of ayahuasca. And so, for the first month, I was essentially like a guest there. And so it was awesome when you came through, and we got to sit in ceremony together, and some amazing things happened in ceremony together.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really felt like you were an important piece in my journey at that time. Really,
You too.
Yeah. It was the right combination of I think where we were at in our lives. And and I'll never forget, I think I told you this earlier this week, but I'll never forget the thing that you told me. I think it was after our third ceremony or something, and you were like, I realized that our demons actually love us because they want us to be the best versions of ourselves. And so they're going to challenge us. And when we get to the other side, we're going to be better versions of ourselves. And, at the moment I was dealing with quite a number of demons myself, and that was a big turning point for me. So.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. I like to be able to have that impact on somebody else's life. I mean, I just finishing up another week here in Costa Rica at Soltara, which has been absolutely phenomenal. Every time I do this, I kind of just am reminded why I've told people that ayahuasca was the best thing that ever happened to me. Just kind of over the past couple of years, I kind of just been transitioning into this role. I've been writing these books, and I've been doing some videos and some public speaking, and now this podcast. And just kind of, this podcast is called Sophia. It's a sharing of wisdom. And, one of the things I kind of got in my experience this week was kind of the pain that we kind of work through in ceremony, because it is painful, and a lot of the time it's not always some blissful, lovely experience, which do happen and are great. But the pain that we work through, it's almost like we're these alchemists that are transmuting that pain into wisdom that can be shared, and people. So it's almost like we're these conduits, and that wisdom. People might not have to sit in ceremony, if they, you're kind of able to transmit those kinds of things,
Oh, that's beautiful. It brings a whole new idea to the magic that goes on in there. We're transforming pain into wisdom.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. That's very, I just came up with this week while we're in ceremony. And the work that you guys are doing is just, it was such a weird thing for me, because 2 weeks ago I released my first essay where I actually spoke publicly about ayahuasca, and the framing of it was, this was a guru for me in terms of I walked this path with ayahuasca, like just, basically trying to be a better person. And then, a couple of years ago, just enlightenment kind of like just banged me over the head completely out of the blue. Like that was just like, oh, this is happening now. And, felt like I was in ceremony, got like losing my mind.
It's not quite what you expect the way things to happen like that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the stuff that the healing that I just witness every time there with other people, and it's I think Dr. Gabor Mate said it right. It's not a panacea. It's not something that just kind of fixes you and it's all good. I mean, you got to go back and put that stuff into practice with your life. You got to integrate, which is why I think it's so wonderful that Soltara has such an intense focus on integration. You guys did 2 integration talks during the week. You gave us the Hero's Journal, which was this beautiful book written by Kendra Birdsall, which was just an incredible piece of literature. That's just like a workbook.
Like
it's a workbook that helps you kind of like put everything that we went through in ceremony into perspective. And you even let me do my talk about the hero's journey, which was, thank you again for that.
Yeah,
that
so fitting. Things lined up really well.
Yeah.
Integration's been like a interesting thing. When we first kind of started this project, and it was like we were all putting our heads together in terms of what we wished we would have had, and how we wished we had been supported in our own respective journeys. And I did get the very strong message, because I was really in a bubble for about a year and a half when I was in Peru, working at the other center, and it was a wonderful, and I received a lot of healing, but it was a bubble. And I got the message towards the end when I was not really getting many more answers from drinking, and really the message was, you have all the answers, like now you need to go and do something with it. And so I actually, the ownership changed of that company, and I ended up going back to the States to work remotely for a little bit, and integrating that was really, really challenging, because you are in this sort of heightened state, this bubble, and it happens in different time scales for everybody, but for me it was a really long time. And so I really felt like the need for, when I went back home and I went back to the US, and there was, a lot of chaos happening in that time. It was 2017 and into 2018. And, there's just the energy there had changed a lot since, before I had left, and I had also changed a lot. And so how to kind of manage that, and how to even talk about, the experience that I had, and translate that into, something real and tangible was really difficult. And so that it's essentially the integration of that time was Soltara with a focus on integration, because I really felt like we needed better language, we needed better support system. Community was a big part of it. Kendra felt like, she wished that she had some guidance, which, led to the development of this book and integration sessions and things like that. So, I feel like these centers like these, and ayahuasca ceremonies in general, is kind of like on the front lines of the change in consciousness that I feel like is slowly taking place throughout the world, and this medicine's spreading. But again, it's like, if you don't do anything with it, then it's just a peak experience and a light show, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, like it was, and actually I'm going to do a series of videos. I think I kind of mentioned this a little bit to you. My plan is to do a series of videos about, just it's kind of like a reconnection with your heart, like this kind of work. Like there's, we one of the things I experienced in ceremony this past week is that kind of literalism is the thing that's killing the planet to some degree. Like we take everything literally in the West, and we kind of like have just like pushed that out into the world, and with globalization, and that there's no room for metaphor anymore, except for, okay, we got our artists who are like basically our shamans now. They're the people who are trying to like talk about stuff that goes beyond what we see in the world. but there's no traction in it. I mean, like if you look at like the Shipibo tribe, the shamans are highly respected members of the community, and like the elders, and they're people who, they're the people who are given the place that they deserve, I think, to some degree in society. Whereas in our in the West, there's so much obsession with the subject-object divide. Like there's stuff out here, and when I was a kid, I used to think that science was the be-all, end-all in terms of explaining the universe.
Me too. Right. Yeah. And materialism, I think all of this really comes from this understanding of materialism, and not even necessarily, although this is a symptom of it, not the consumerist nature of materialism. I think that's a part of it, but actually this idea that, science is sort of its own dogma, and even in religion, even in Western Abrahamic religions, there's this idea of separation. There's God, and then there's you, and then like they're not necessarily connected in the same way as more animistic, understandings of our worldviews or belief systems, or shamanistic or traditional. And actually, it's funny that you say that, because I was just reading this book the other day, and it's called, and the name just slipped my mind, but I'll think of it. But it was talking about the stories of creation, and how one indigenous tradition is in Native American tradition. Tells about the story of creation. It's called Sky Woman Falling, and the idea being that from the heavens fell a woman from the sky carrying it's called Braiding Sweetgrass is the name of the book. And she was holding, she pulled a branch off of the tree of life as she fell, and sweetgrass was in that, as well as seeds and other leaves. And she falls into this ocean, and all of these animals come, and they're like, oh my goodness, this woman, she lands on the back of a turtle, and they're like, we need to get her land because she doesn't have any land to go on. And so they all try and dive to the bottom of the ocean to pick up some land to make her a home, and some of them sacrifice themselves and die. And then the very last animal, this little muskrat, ends up going down, and he floats up and he sacrificed himself, but he has this little hand, in his little hand is some dirt, and he puts it on the back of the turtle. And the woman, in her gratitude, dances and sings in gratitude, and then that earth becomes, she basically builds the whole world, not just from her, but from the alchemy of all of the gifts of the animals, plus her dance of gratitude. And then she takes the seeds that she was holding and plants all of the plants. And so there's this like beautiful garden that is co-created with the animals, from her, who is one of the first immigrants basically from this other world. So this creation story is, very much one of reciprocity. Whereas you look at the story of Adam and Eve, and it's, Eve was cast out of the Garden of Eden to a cold and, unfeeling world. And she basically just has to bend the world to her will and make her way until she's allowed back to her home of heaven. And it's this huge divide of separation between, home and where we are living right now. And the subconscious understanding, I guess, that passes on to people, whether or not you really believe in that, it's societal, it's like, this is the creation story of the West, where we are, separate, and we need to bend the world to our will. And, we're at the top of the chain. And it's a totally different feel, compared to these more traditional stories about, interconnectedness and gifts and reciprocity and things like that. So I agree. I think there's this underlying theme in the West of separation, materialism, all of these concepts that write the narratives that maybe we don't even think about or know that are being written about us. Yeah.
I think that, I think that underneath it all, there is this, there is this underlying wisdom underneath all of it, and the what we had was necessary in order for us to build the world that we've got. I mean, the stuff that happened through science is just incredible. There's so much of our world that we do owe to it, but it's still got that whole I'll say the taint of separation. I mean, everything that we do, we kind of, we break things down to their constituent parts instead of looking at things as a whole. Like, I mean, you find that with like all kinds of pharmacology, and, you know, there's, we look even at the way we look at mental health, we kind of, we look at it in a less holistic manner. I mean, when I was going through my really rough time, I went into my doctor, and, you know, somebody first suggested to me, like, oh, you're probably depressed. And then I brought it to my doctor and said, I think I'm depressed. And then she prescribed me antidepressants. And it's kind of like, and these things are just like buttons to press or like to kind of like block a hole in your brain. Like, I mean, this is a really simplistic way of looking at it, but block a hole so that there's more stuff keeps from leaking out. Like, you know?
Correct the chemical imbalance that must be the cause. And
and I mean, like, you work with medicine like ayahuasca, and you kind of realize that okay, this is like, you know, this isn't it. My issues date back to when I was a kid, and the trauma, and like this whole week for me, I kind of like, while I was in ceremony, I picked up a bunch of understanding about, you know, like this stuff, that these wounds that we all carry. Like, I'm sure you see it all the time in terms of people coming in with like this early childhood wounding, but it's like all this intergenerational stuff that's just coming down from people feeling disconnected and alone. Like, I think that was a kind of like the root of it. Like, you know, like, is this it? Like, what are we doing here? Like, you know, if you're looking at the world in a very literal sense, rather than bringing any metaphor into your life, you kind of, it becomes oppressive and cold and separating and alienating, and you know, and people lash out and react in different ways. And, you know, I just kind of feel like that's kind of like, as a society, there's like, you know, we're dealing with the everything's coming to a head. I mean, you look at who's in the White House, you look at like the kinds of stuff. Like, I mean, it's
scary, and I do think there's an interesting stigma with the idea or word holistic, because and I'm guilty of this too. You know, I was a militant atheist for a long time, and, you know, very much in the science world. And I do think that there is a place for that. You know, I absolutely think we've, you know, the advances that we've made with science and modern medicine are amazing. We've also somewhat pigeonholed ourselves into that ideology, and it almost becomes a religion in and of itself. And really what I personally feel like the answer is somewhere in between. It's like, why would there be these two entirely different, extremely effective in their own rights, you know, concepts or modes of healing, if, you know, the answers to our problems doesn't incorporate both of them? Like, why can't it? You know, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And so, you know, I think really the fact that ayahuasca is coming into the world and coming into a little bit more of the mainstream, and psychedelics in general, is because there's a big need for, you know, expanding the definition of what healing looks like to encompass not just the physical, but also the emotional and mental and spiritual. Like, that's an aspect of human existence that has always been the case. I feel like we've always searched for something larger than ourselves, some interconnectedness, this soul's yearning. You know, I think there's a reason for that. And so, you know, bringing this concept of, you know, becoming whole again probably is very much what's needed right now. And there's probably a reason for that. You know, we've denied these parts of ourselves in the interest of breaking us down into constituent molecules. And like, how can we, you know, tweak the molecules or push the buttons and
exactly,
solve the problem? It's like, it's more than that. That could be part of it, but likely it's more than that.
And I mean, it's funny because I'm very thankful for antidepressants for what they did. They gave me a bit of breathing space so that I could eventually find my way down here, or find my way down to Peru for the first time, where, you know, I saved my life. You know, like that was
a stepping stone.
That was it. I mean, it's terrifying. It's even it has been terrifying to even talk about this, because I mean, I do have a day job as a lawyer. Like, you know, I'm you know, it's but at the same time, I do feel a responsibility to talk about it, because, I mean, this is, as far as I can see, this is, you know, this is in the same vein of religion and, the mystical and these things that are given, in Canada, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms as part of our Constitution, and that one of those rights is freedom of religion. And I mean, this is kind of what I found, to agree. I mean, it's not an organized, set of like, everybody's kind of like does the same thing kind of thing, but I mean, it's more of a personal thing. But I mean, this is the same experience, and the reason it's protected is because it gives people so much in terms of like a spirituality, gives people so much. I think it's a very important aspect of our lives, and the joy and the bliss of being able to be in touch with that part of ourselves is just there's no putting a dollar figure on that. It's
it's true. I've definitely felt like there's been, like, I always had this hope, I guess. Like I grew up on fantasy novels and like Chronicles of Narnia and like The Golden Compass and all of these different, and I always had this yearning for there to be some deeper meaning to life, or some sort of magic, or some sort of interconnectedness that I was somehow tied into. And I sort of had put that idea aside when I became very much into the scientific framework of thinking and living, and it was almost like I didn't feel like that would be too good to be true, and that's an interesting process in and of itself, that comes up, I think, of a worthiness, touching some deeper layers, but discovering the expansiveness of the energetic world coming into psychedelics, and especially ayahuasca, because I didn't really believe in spirits, and then I met a spirit so I guess I believe in them. And it's been an interesting journey, because there's really no, at some point you have to take into account the empirical evidence too, and the experiential understanding that, I did feel as though there was a deeper wisdom in this plant, like that it was actually a teacher, and that I was a student, and that, it was, endowing me with knowledge that I wouldn't have otherwise had, or had access to, perhaps.
For me, like the big piece for me was the fact that just by, because it was almost like I likened it to kind of like, from my experiences have been like, basically life lessons taught through visionary metaphor, and kind of by following all these ideas, like I became a kinder, like it's all this pro-social stuff, kinder, gentler, harder worker, like all this stuff, like all the things that you would want an experience like this to do for somebody, it did for me. Like, even in ceremony this week, I had all of these, I feel like I'm a good father, but like a realization on how to be a better father, and it affects the people around us, when we find these types of experiences. And, I just, that she was able to give me those kinds of things that I could find within myself, and I say she as in ayahuasca, because it does feel like a dialogue when you're in there, at least for me, like
right,
this.
Right.
And it's one of these things where, and it's trying to like break down a lot of the stigma that people have around these kinds of things. Is definitely some work that needs to be done,
And I think everyone will experience it slightly differently too. I think there's no, for example, at Soltara, we're very careful, intentional to not necessarily refer to ayahuasca as a feminine or masculine spirit, because it does come in different forms. For some people, it does come in a very feminine form. And for me, that seems to be the case as well. But it's not always the case, And I think allowing an openness towards, discovering what it is that spirituality means to each person, or connection. It doesn't even necessarily have to be entirely spiritual. I think people come and, they just find that they are much more connected to their emotions or to their body or to, their higher selves, and that this is more like a gateway to that connection. Whatever it is that they feel is, potentially their true nature, or, something like that. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of different paths up the mountain, I think, as you said in your presentation.
That's a classic, and it's very true. I mean, everyone's path is different.
Right.
Some people, never take ayahuasca and have their own spiritual, journey through yoga, meditation. It could be any sort of thing,
Exactly.
And I think that that's important, kind of, again, with the whole idea that it's not a panacea, and it's not, it's not for everybody,
Exactly.
If you really feel called to do it, then, you got to answer that question for yourself. And I think that that's, kind of giving people their sea legs for the world, or like, kind of like their legs for how to navigate the world in a much more, in a way that's going to make them happier and the world a better place. I mean, that's...
I've really felt that a lot of the lessons I've gained are just about connection more. And so whether that's connection to self, connection to others, connection to love, and what that really means in this world, connection to nature, and like this understanding of reciprocity that goes very deep on what seems like an energetic level. And so I think for me that's been really the ultimate lesson that maybe could have gotten through other paths, but this for me was a straight shot, very directly, like, follow my feet and this will definitely help.
I know, exactly. So there's something I want to ask you about, because I've written a few books, and I kind of I know you've got a book in the cooker, and I kind of want to ask you about what that book is, and how it came about, the ideas that you're thinking about for it. And
thanks. So a couple years ago, it was just before the MAP Psychedelic Science Conference, they were having a book proposal contest. And so I say this because it's kind of actually an accident how it started to happen, but now it's happening. And Dan, it was the contest itself was any sort of psychedelic literature topic. And then Dan at the time was asking me if I wanted to co-author something with him. And I was like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. I've actually been floating this idea around what really was fascinating to me, being down at the center in Peru for a year and a half and seeing all of these really powerful transformations happen. There was a lot of mental transformation, but what really fascinated me was physical transformations. So people would come through and have Crohn's disease or diabetes in one case, major injuries that, were like, I don't think I can use this arm anymore because of this shoulder injury I had, or heavy migraines, just all of these different physical ailments. And through ayahuasca, they were able to realize or understand or get to the emotional root of what was really causing that, and the trauma or the energetic load that was on their system that was causing these issues. And once they healed that energetic and emotional root, their physical bodies followed. And even diabetes, it was crazy. Lupus was another one, and other autoimmune diseases.
It's funny, like, just to sort of interrupt, because I just had this experience this week. I mean, I've had a little bit of a twinge in my lower back, let's say. I kind of like, just one of these things where I kind of like, oh, am I getting, I'm 34 years old. Am I, I'm going to have my back fixed by the time I'm 40, that kind of thing.
Right.
And
scary thought.
Yeah. And so in ceremony, I I had this experience of that getting drawn out, and I realized the connection to some, to some childhood wounds about over my. It was actually over my my body, because it was one of my earlier challenges. Let's say was, I was a bit overweight, and I was always like, I was like, why is my body betraying me? I eventually kind of like brute forced it with a lot of diet and exercise when I was in my early 20s. And then, in my later 20s, I, got into a bit of fasting and that kind of thing. But it was always like there was this war between me and my body. And I kind of had this like experience of that kind of getting dealt with and, purged out. And, I'm just a couple days out of it, but, like I feel like, my, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of, I felt like my metabolism coming back online. Like it was a lot of like really, really crazy stuff. But, this is the thing. I mean, the placebo effect is, kind of it's an example of how the human mind can actually, cause things to happen within the body,
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's magic.
Yeah.
And actually it's funny, after I came up with this idea of essentially, in a nutshell, trying to understand this nexus between, our physiology, our healing, our physical healing, and our consciousness, and with plant medicines being a gateway to understanding our consciousness more deeply, and essentially how that affects our physical health. And so, what is it that we currently understand about consciousness? How are psychedelics and plant medicines informing that understanding? And then how can we use that understanding to improve our physical and overall like health and well-being? So it's a big topic, but it's something that, I think if we can get to the working title is Roots of Consciousness, if we can get to the root of it, then, we don't necessarily even need plant medicine to do that. It's just that was essentially what's been informing, my understanding of it and experience of it, and also, an understanding of consciousness in general. And so after I ended up winning the book proposal contest. Dan dropped out, and I was like, well, I kind of already wrote it, like, let me just submit it. And so I submitted it, and then it raised $15,000, and I got a publisher. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm writing this book, right? And then I was sort of starting to do this research for it, and discovered Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's just done amazing work with healing the self through the mind. And one of his books, which I highly recommend, is called "You Are the Placebo," and it's this idea that we do have the mind-body connection is a real thing, and the fact that we ever thought it wasn't is like scientifically impossible anyway. Of course they're connected, right? And so so that's kind of, I felt like there was a lot of literature about consciousness. There was a lot of literature about ayahuasca, particularly ayahuasca and healing mental illness, but I didn't feel like there was a lot about connecting those three things: consciousness, physical health, and plant medicine. And so I definitely bit off a lot. So I'm like, there's the research is ongoing, but it's, the most fascinating topic I can possibly think of to write about. So it's been a really interesting process. So hopefully within the next year or so.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I pre-ordered one.
Thank you. I know it's been, Soltara's kind of taken over my life the last year, but
yeah, I was going to ask you about hobbies, but I figure you don't have any.
That's about it. I've started walking every morning.
So, we kind of come into this stuff in our 20s, like we get into, like our 20s, 30s. A lot of us do. I think that there's a large segment. I know there's like varying degrees of people's ages and their life backgrounds when they come into this kind of work. But what I am curious about is, like, when you were a kid, did you ever have any encounters with spirituality or anything that kind of like stuck with you or anything like that prior to plant medicine?
I would say the closest I ever got to really feeling a connection to magic in the world was through the books I was reading, and kind of my own imagination about that. I would really get lost in story for up until college. I think was a very avid reader, and that was pretty much the extent of it. I was raised Roman Catholic, and so I kind of bounced the pendulum the other way after that. There was a lot of, nothing against religion and Catholicism. It certainly helped a lot of people, including my mother. But for me, it brought about a lot of shame and guilt, and there was a real negative connotation for me about religious spirituality in general. So it was something that I did because I had to do, but it actually pushed me away from it for a really long time. So it really wasn't until I discovered plant medicine. Cannabis was my gateway drug to psychedelics in college. They were right all along. That's why they didn't want us to do it. Yeah. No, but so I would say that was my first, not so much as a kid, but more actually as an adult.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did have one more question. You already mentioned that thing that I said to you about our demons being our greatest teachers.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to name another bit of wisdom that has helped you the most, or the one bit of wisdom that has helped you the most, what would it be?
Oh man. I guess really this understanding of the way that we have been domesticated by society. It came about as sort of like an integration of a lot of my medicine experience, and then I was reading The Four Agreements, which had a really profound impact on it became really embodied for me, just realizing how much I had based my own life on this victim judge mindset, and the way that my desire for control, and also my amazing ability to criticize myself, was creating these conditions where my love for myself was conditional, and that I had been essentially taught by society that my worthiness was based on things that I did and not who I was. And so I was only worthy of love for, what I could do or the things that I achieved or accomplished. And all of these things are external metrics of validation, right? And so realizing that I was living my life by all of these external metrics was hard to see, because it tied into a lot of things, people pleasing and doing what I felt like I should do, and how worthy I was of my own love was a very strong script that had been written, not even necessarily by me. And so, it's been a real process, I guess, undoing all of those things and kind of breaking down what was a big foundation built on things that really, at the end of the day, were lies that were told to me. And so I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's been like I think, overarching process for me. And what I've seen in I've had, all things considered, I have had a very blessed life and childhood. And yet I was feeling so unworthy of my own love in so many ways, and just feeling like very like my understanding of myself was actually rather limited. So that's been a journey to really not need those external metrics of validation, and knowing that even if, Soltara were to crumble and this book were a complete failure, like I would still be Melissa, and like that would be okay. It's a hard thing, but radical self-acceptance is definitely like a lesson that's a continuous process, and that plant medicine's really helped with.
Yeah. I resonate so much with that, because so much of my own journey was about self-hatred, and, I always felt like I was this weak, person, like this very, like I've felt that way with the way that I approached women. And so I respond, I respond with stuff like when I was younger, I got into like this pickup artist bullshit, this kind of stuff, and it wasn't until I actually, went through, the plant, like the experience with ayahuasca, that I kind of there was a lot of, a lot of the lessons that I learned were just kind of like, she was like helping me to show me my own strength, and to show me that, I wasn't this like person that didn't, that just couldn't do anything right, or, and all this arrogance that I built up, because I was like, I was this intelligent guy. So I kind of like used that as a weapon, and just like, I'd do stuff like correct people about like stupid spelling mistake, like not saying stupid as in stupid for me to think that they were, just kind of just this, that whole thing. I think there's so much of our lives is about that. I think a lot of us get caught in that trap of external validation,
Yeah, it's a bit of a loop, because it causes us to really feel like we need to prove ourselves to ourselves and to other people, which then, kind of like you're saying, can almost, like with the pickup artist stuff, it can almost lead into this like way of attempting to control or manipulate the world such that you're able to get the validation that you need. And then that whole time you're unable to have an authentic, connection with yourself and therefore others. And so I totally feel that, like getting caught in this loop of like, trying to prove myself to myself, and in that way just completely lacking real authenticity and denying myself that. And at the end of the day, it's like, man, this is actually a huge lesson for me too. Vulnerability is actually a strength instead of a weakness. And that
takes a huge amount of courage
to
be
does.
vulnerable.
Oh, it's so hard.
But when you do it, it's like beauty kind of just like issues forth from, whatever part of that your life that happens in,
It's so funny that you say that too, because then the other thing I was thinking was how your burden is your strength, and your burden is your beauty. Like that what you carry, is actually how strong you are. And
it's funny, I just got all these chills, but I was just thinking about like, because I was like, I thought I was weak, and so the name of my book is the Yoga Strength, like
yeah, exactly, right? It's like learning our own strength, and that takes courage, because it does require us to be vulnerable with ourselves first and foremost. And like definitely since really opening up, working with plant medicine, it's like I can't really bullshit myself anymore. No. I just, I can't lie to myself. It's annoying sometimes. Try as I might still.
Exactly. Radical honesty is part of the process. And it makes like, it's pain, like again, this like pain that we go through, like we shy away from it. Like the healing process is painful. But you gotta do it. Like you gotta do it to be happy. I mean, that's pretty much the way I see things now. It's like you're gonna have to face it. You're gonna have to face all this bullshit that you've done all over throughout your life.
And I just feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to do that. I know that not everyone does, and also not everyone, necessarily has this level of access either. And that's something that, I really feel strongly about. It's why I'm grateful that you're doing the things you're doing as well, like really helping to get the word out and destigmatize, because I think the more that we can, have these types of conversations that are real and not sugarcoating it, and, really validating it as a grounded healing modality that predates modern medicine. I mean, they've been using this sort of system of healthcare for way before,
right? Thousands of years.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it's, it goes back to our own roots as humans, and the way that we have a relationship with plants in this world. And so, it's a real privilege, and I do feel a real responsibility to, whatever my service to the world is, to really put my best foot forward and try and lean into that challenge.
Well, that is so awesome. And
Thank you.
I think we'll leave it there. Thanks again, Melissa. I really appreciate you coming on and speaking with me.
Thank you so much,
This has been such an experience. Thank you for everything for, over the past 5 years that we've known each other.
Con muchísimo gusto, as they say here in Costa Rica. It was so much pleasure. Thank you so much for coming, Andrew. It's been wonderful having you.
It has been wonderful. And I think I'm going to be back. Yeah. So good.
Our annual reunion.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, well, I'll see you next year then.
All right. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to mention a couple more things. First, I am a writer, and I am constantly writing books. I'm currently releasing a series of spiritual fantasy books that I call the Clovier Cycle, which includes the Yoga Trilogy and Tales of Sight, which are a bunch of short stories. It should be clued up by the end of 2020. The first book in the trilogy, The Yoga of Strength, is a hero's journey into the heart of reality, and there is a lot of me in there. An easy description is Game of Thrones meets the Bhagavad Gita. I am also writing a series of children's books called The Pleiades Remixes, starting with The Unicorn. That will be out next year. 2020. I also write philosophy, and that's starting with the Avatar Pentology. The first book in the series, Night of Sophia, which focuses on wisdom, was released on September 15, 2019. More information on all of that can be found at andrewmarkrowe.com. That's Andrew, MARCROWE.com. Finally, this podcast is powered by Caritas, Unconditional Love for All People. Caritas is Latin for charity, and also love for all people. That's Caritas, and more info can be found at poweredbycaritas.com. All of the work I do outside of my day job, including this podcast and my books, is powered by Caritas. Basically, I give everything I possibly can away, and I want to encourage you to think about giving something away today. If you want to give me some help to defray some of my costs, which would be much appreciated, you can do so at my website, andrewmarkrowe.com. Again, Andrew, MARCROWE.com, under the donate button. There are a few on there. But I'm not doing this to, quote, get anything from anyone. What I want you to do is think about paying it forward to someone in your life. It doesn't have to be money. Your time is your most valuable asset. Spend some time with your family, cook them dinner, just be with them. Giving is a superpower, and I mean that in a very real way. Giving without expectation of anything in return, which is also known as karma yoga, helped to set me free. While I can't guarantee it will do the same for you, it's definitely worth a shot. Much love.